Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. So SimBrief have dropped a little bit of a surprise on us in if you go into SimBrief now, which is where I guess the majority of you do all of your flight planning. I know I certainly do. It's almost become like a default place really for any sort of serious flight simmer. You go to SimBrief for your flight plan, and when any new aircraft comes out, the first thing I think of is, well, can it have SimBrief integration? And if it doesn't, then it's a no-go for me. So what they've done is recently they have added a performance section to the menu here on the left. So if we go to performance and tools, what we can now do is do our performance calculations for takeoff and landing. Very, very cool. So there's a nice easy button up here, populate from last flight. This will take the information that's currently in our flight plan. So we're in the Boeing 737-800. We are in the first class configuration actually from PMDG. We are taking off from Gatwick, runway 26 left. The shorten, this would be relevant if you were doing like an intersection takeoff, say air traffic control started you further up the runway for your takeoff, but we're going to use the full runway length. You can change from feet and meters, kilograms and pounds. It's brought in our weight. The flap settings, it's set to optimum, but you can obviously override this. I'm guessing it's going to go 5. It normally does. Thrust settings, again, optimum. We've got our bleed settings, anti-ice for, like if you're doing winter ops, things like that. And of course it's brought in the weather, so we've got the wind of 259 at 9 and outside air temperature of 18 degrees. I'm probably going to change that, there we go, to 1009, and we are in dry conditions today. And the next thing to think about is whether you want to do a flex-based takeoff. So if we hover over the little question mark, it gives you some further context. So enable or disable reduced thrust calculations. And what this is that most airlines a lot of the time will calculate exactly the right safe amount of thrust that is required to get them off the ground. That saves running the engines at like 100% for every single flight, which can decrease wear on the engines and increase their lifespan. So we're going to go enabled for that. The other thing is the improved climb. Now, I don't think we're going to bother with this today, given that we're at Gatwick and we've got plenty of runway to deal with. But what this will do, you can basically have faster takeoff speeds that will then obviously give you an improved rate of climb out of the airport. This might be relevant if you're at a high altitude airport, things like that, or if you've got some terrain that you really need to get out the way of. But given that we're at Gatwick, I'm going to say no, we're not going to worry about that. And then we click calculate, and now we've got all of this information available. Now the calculation has been done. Obviously the numbers we're going to probably pay most attention to are our V1 speeds. We got our VR for the rotation and V2. And all of that has been calculated based on like weights and whether we're going to have the bleeds on, the anti-ice, the flap settings, things like that. And we've got our temperature of 49 for our flex takeoff. If we come down, we get to see kind of whereabouts on the runway we should be lifting off from. So we've got our last reject point is at 5,783 feet. And then we should be stopped if we decide to call off the takeoff by 7,220 feet. Otherwise, we got our V1, we got our rotate point, and then we got the V2 point at 144 knots. So everything is looking good, no issues there. So we're going to use those values 138, 138, 144, and 49 and input those into our plane. Okay, so let's get that information in. We've already got flaps of 5 set, and we're going to do 138 in V1 as per the calculations, 138 for our rotate point, and 144 for V2. Then we can select our center of gravity. If you click it, it puts it in the scratch pad. Click it again, it puts it in for you. That gives us a trim of 4.81, which, if we zoom in a bit, we'll be able to see 4.81. It's got to be it about there. And there we have it. Obviously, if you want to change settings over here, if you want to do like a flaps 15 takeoff, I wouldn't recommend it, but you can do, and then it obviously changes all the stuff over here on the right. But if you're not sure, you can go for optimum, and that will help you out. It doesn't just do takeoff data, although that's what we're doing right now. It does do landing performance. So let's get ourselves pushed back. We'll do the takeoff with a flex takeoff, see that it all performs nicely, and then we'll look at landing performance once we're in the air. We're not going far today. We're just popping down to Bristol from Gatwick. Very short flight, but nevertheless, it'll be fun to see what we kind of get in terms of landing calculations while we are en route. So before we head off to the runway, I thought it's important that we take a look at this little link here about these calculations. It says, due to differences in calculation methods, safety margin considerations, and reference data, SimBrief's takeoff and landing calculations may not return exactly the same results as your aircraft's EFB. Both results may be equally valid, however it's recommended to cross-check against your aircraft's own performance calculator if one is available. So basically, both could be completely valid because they're working it out based on different things and, safety considerations, things like that. So what I thought we'd do, we've got a 138, 138, 144 from SimBrief with a temperature of 49. So looking here at the one from PMDG, if we calculate it, we see that we've got a temperature of 42, then we've got 140, 140, 145 for our speed. So a little bit different, but again, both could be valid, so it's worth just running both, making sure that they're reasonable. We're going to run with the SimBrief ones today just to give it a good test out, make sure we get off the ground safely and back down on the ground safely. But it is worth checking on both, or if you don't have it available on your aircraft, then well, great, you can use the one that's built into SimBrief, but it's good to have it as an extra kind of reference point. I always remember my maths teacher saying whenever we did calculations, always check it again, make sure it's reasonable, make sure it's reasonable. I always remember him saying that, make sure it's reasonable. And again, you can get a sense if one is really far off from the other, then you know that there's probably something weird going on and you need to look into it before you depart. Right, let's get down to the runway. Okay, so we're just getting ourselves lined up here on 26 left. We are going to do a flex takeoff. That is, it's going to use the calculations that we gave the plane. So we gave it a temperature of 49 degrees. Basically, that means the engines aren't going to run quite as hot as if we just put it into full toga mode. That increases the life of the engine. So all of that information has come from SimBrief's performance calculator. How it works in the 737, you set your thrust, and then weirdly, you click on this little screw here. You see how your cursor changes from a normal arrow to a little hand. That is like a shortcut to set a flex takeoff in the 737. For those that don't know, took me a while to figure that out. I probably should just map a button. Anyway, let's get gone. So I'm going to set thrust to 40%, holding it on the brakes. We got flaps 5 set. And then we'll click this. And away we go. Thrust is set. I'll just move my throttles up to meet where the thrust should be. And we are off. Okay, nice headwind coming directly at us from down the runway. Rotate, let's go. Gear up. Jolly good. Well, I would say that all went very well indeed. So we are now climbing our way out of Gatwick. There was no issues on the takeoff. We had plenty of runway. Nice stutter there from the sim. Love to see it. And we're going to make our way across to Bristol once we get up to cruise. And we are, well, it's going to be a very short cruise, but once we get gone out of our SID, we're going to take a look at our landing calculations that we're going to need to get us into Bristol and take a look at all the variables that are involved there. Okay, so on to our landing performance data. I've clicked populate from last flight, and you can see here I've set flaps to 30, brakes optimum. We're going to use reversers, add 5 to our VREF, outside air temperature is 16. We've got the wind data, 1010 hectopascals, and we have a dry runway. We're using the in-flight method for calculation because we are in flight. If we were sat at the gate, we would use our dispatch method instead, and the difference between the two is the dispatch method applies a 67 or 92% if it's wet margin to the actual landing distance. In-flight method calculates a 7-second flare time from threshold to touchdown plus an additional 15% safety margin. So we're going to go within flight. Oh, we've just reached top of descent. And hit calculate as we've already done over here. So you can see we are being told to use auto brakes max. And we've got a VREF of 14 floor. And we've got the added 5 to it to give us 149. We're using reversers, flaps 30. And we've got our actual landing distance, and we've got our factored landing distance, and these are both within the distance available of 1,882 meters. So if we come down, also we've got some nice weather information here and runway information, which is all handy to have. You can see here, this is our actual stopping distance. We should be stopped here if we obviously get the touchdown right. and the factor distance here for safety is up here. However, if we were to change the calculation reference from factored to actual and recalculate that, you can see here it's kind of telling us that if we come up to the top, it's changed us from auto brakes max to auto brake 3. And what that means is it's going to take us a lot longer to stop, to the point where the actual stopping distance is almost at the end of the runway, and the factored stopping distance, that is the distance with a bit of safety margin applied to it, is longer than the runway that we have available. So that's not a good place. We don't want to be doing that. So we're going to go back to factored distance, calculate, and you can see now we are comfortably within margin. So there we go. I think we're looking good. We've got a 144 VREF and a 149 VAP, and we will start making our way down into Bristol. We'll use flaps 30, maximum auto brakes, and we'll see what we get. So interestingly, we've got some suggestions here from the plane. For our flaps 30 arrival, it wants us at 146 knots with a wind correction of +5. So instead of 144 at 30, the plane thinks 146, and obviously the +5 will get us to 151 as opposed to 149. So let's go with what SimBrief said. So we'll do 30/144. Pop that in there. And there we go. We've got our custom ref in here now on the PFD. It's complaining it's not going to be able to slow down at Asham, but don't worry, we'll fix that. And I will catch up with you once we get on to the ILS at Bristol, and we'll see if we can get ourselves down using the settings from SimBrief, because we're kind of going against what the plane thinks. But they are very, very close to each other, so I think it's going to be fine in both cases. But we'll see how we get on, and I will catch up with you when we're on approach.
Minimums.
Continue. I'm a little bit slow on the VREF, but we're okay.
100.
Keep that nose down.
50. 40. 30. 20. 10.
And the ground comes up to meet you at Bristol, of course. Okay, reversers on, auto brakes max. $70 knots, reversers off. Easy peasy. Stopped in plenty of time there, so the calculations were good, albeit my flying potentially a little bit on the questionable side, but then what's new there? Okay, let's get our speed brakes away. Let's clean up our flaps. Check out my new flaps lever, by the way. 3D printed that one yesterday. There's a whole video on it on the channel. I'll put a little card up if I can remember or figure out how to do that. You can go and take a look. But I would say that was pretty successful from SimBrief there on both counts, getting us out from Gatwick and obviously getting us back into Bristol as well. And again, the settings that the plane had varied a little bit from SimBrief, but not by much, so I think they were both reasonable. And as their website says, is that, you know, the values may be different because they're taking into account different factors such as safety margins, etc. But I think both values were absolutely reasonable, both from the Boeing and from SimBrief. So it's absolutely an awesome tool to have at your disposal from SimBrief. And it's just, it's gone from strength to strength to strength. I really do feel like it's kind of the default, really, in terms of flight planning and things like that. So it's great to have calculations built into it as well. I kind of feel like whenever a new plane comes out, the first thing I think of is, well, can it integrate with SimBrief? Because if it doesn't, I'm not interested. It's really that powerful, and it's that central to everything I do here on the channel. And it's amazing that, you know, you get so much for free on SimBrief. Obviously, I pay for the Navigraph subscription, and I would encourage you to do so, because the charts you get are just absolutely phenomenal. And if you've got the cash flow to do it, go for the yearly one, because over the year it will work out a lot cheaper, and you get some absolutely amazing charts to fly yourself around the world with. It's an incredible service, an incredible contribution to the community by the folks over at Navigraph who own SimBrief, and it's just firing on all cylinders. And again, it just harkens back to a point I keep making on videos a lot lately, but it is just such a really good time to be a simmer. We've just got so much good stuff going on at the moment. We've got planes that are coming at us left and right. We've got things like this from Navigraph. It's just all happening, and it's great. It's considering where Microsoft Flight Simulator was a few years ago, i.e. non-existent. It's what an absolute transformation we've had. It's just incredible, really. Anyway, folks, I'm going to stop rambling. I will leave a link in the description to SimBrief and Navigraph if by some reason you're not familiar and you want to check it out and learn a little bit more. But get subbed to the channel. We do a lot of full flight videos, live streams, other such content revolving around flight sim. Make sure you hit the like button as well if you've enjoyed today's video. It really does help an absolute ton. Anyway, I'm going to stop rambling. Thank you all so much for watching. Take the very best care of yourselves, and as always, happy flying.